mainstream press is of course on a mission to go after Bernie Sanders, and they do so by essentially putting words in his mouth. The latest example is when he went on Cuomo's show on CNN and spoke a little bit about how Elizabeth Warren is rising in the polls. Now, Cuomo asked him, why do you think that is? And here is how Bernie Sanders answered that question.
What do you think the reason is that Elizabeth Warren is catching up to you in polls? Do you believe that people see her as the more electable version of Bernie Sanders?
Well, I think we are running against a lot of problems. I think that there are a certain number of people who would like to see a woman elected, and I understand that. There are people who would like to see somebody who is younger, and I understand that also. There are a lot of factors out there.
So there was nothing there that was inaccurate. And even the media outlets that are trying to go after him for that answer are acknowledging that what he said there was accurate. We've never had a female president, so of course, naturally, there are people who find it appealing to elect someone who's a woman. And Elizabeth Warren is notably younger than Bernie Sanders is. But following that interview, the response that Bernie Sanders has received from journalists writing straight news articles has been what you're about to read. So one example is this from Vanity Fair. The headline says, Warren is surging because she's got ovaries. But that is not what Bernie Sanders said.
Yeah, and it not only, it says Sanders colon and then that title, making it seem like it's almost a direct quote.
Right.
Which is not what he said, as you saw with your own eyes.
One other example includes New York Magazine, and the headline says, Sanders suggests Warren is catching him in the polls because she's a woman. So that one is a little tiny bit better, but in reality, that is not what he's trying to say. He's trying to say there are members of the electorate who want to elect a woman. They want to see a female president. Now, that's not saying, Elizabeth Warren's policies don't matter. People are just voting for her or are likely to vote for her only because she's a woman. That was not even implied, but the media is making it appear as though he said that, and that's not the case.
So now, look, I actually didn't love that answer. I'll get to why I didn't in a second. I think there was a better way to answer that, but now they turn around, and this is from New York Magazine, and they also attack him for the opposite. They say, since he said that comment, the writer here, Ed Kilgore, says, it smacks of women aren't electable smear. But wait a minute, he said that she's surging partly because people do want to elect a woman. So that would be so you can't criticize him both ways. Like, just because she's got ovaries, she's surging. Just because she's got ovaries, she can't win. Which one is it? Make up your mind. If you're gonna smear the guy, stick with one smear. And he later wrote that it had a faintly sexist aroma. Okay.
Wait, can we go in on that article really quickly? Because I read it and I lost my mind. Like I wanted to just scream from the nearest rooftop about how angry I am at journalists and media in general, and I can't believe that people literally pay for someone like Ed Kilgore to write this. Not a good look, sweetie. The article on New York Mag, like literally, you could have just tweeted it out, dog. You didn't have to actually put this much effort into it. My favorite part was he kept quoting Bernie Sanders and going, while technically accurate, Sanders' way of introducing the idea that it would be good to elect a woman as president, like he kept mentioning that Sanders was technically accurate, but it just didn't look good. And then compared him to Joe Biden's commentary on segregationists, which is
amazing.
How disingenuous do you have to be, dude? Oh my God.
So one thing that I want to point out is that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are friends. Yes, they're running against one another. Yes, they are a little different when it comes to some of their policy proposals and their voting record. But with that said, they have worked together in the Senate. They've been friendly to one another. And there isn't some crazy, angry rivalry. But the way the media is trying to set things up, they're trying to not only drive a wedge between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but more importantly, they're trying to drive a wedge among progressive voters. That's really at the heart of what's going on right now. So they think it's cute to start instigating fights among voters and among Democratic candidates, and it's pretty sick. So let me give you some more. Now, the interview didn't stop there. I think the second half of what Bernie Sanders said was telling. Let's take a quick look.
Elizabeth is a friend of mine. I think she's running a good campaign. But at the end of the day, Chris, whether it's Biden or Warren, Elizabeth Warren or anybody else, What I believe is that, in fact, I am the strongest candidate to defeat Donald Trump. And I think some of the polling shows that. I believe that our campaign can win in the states we have got to win.
So Tommy Christopher, who is not a big fan of Bernie Sanders, to his credit, gave Bernie Sanders credit for that answer. In fact, in his article on this interview, he says Sanders is correct. He and Biden poll well ahead of other Democrats in head-to-head matchups with Trump, and those polls show Sanders defeating Trump by as many as 12 points.
So that poll, we have a certain perspective and it's a progressive one, but we are fair about all of our analysis. So that poll shows Bernie Sanders winning by 12 points, Biden winning by 11 points, Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris only winning by 6 points, and then Buttigieg and others only winning by 2 points. Now, but to be fair, name recognition really matters in those kind of early polls. So I think Buttigieg would beat Trump by way more than 2 points. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to hold that poll against Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris because they have less name recognition than Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. I think the name recognition between Sanders and Biden is comparable. So I think it's fair to say when Biden's winning in those polls that Biden is a little bit more electable according to that particular poll. And now Sanders has the lead in more electability. So I think that's a fair comparison. Now, what I thought was super unfair was Ed Kilgore again in New York Magazine, taking that quote and saying, you see that? That is part of why Bernie Sanders is saying that Elizabeth Warren is not electable because she's a woman. Wait a minute, he said Biden and Warren. So how could you possibly say he meant it about women?
Right.
That's just, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Okay, there is criticism to be had here with Bernie Sanders' commentary, however, and that criticism is probably the fact that Elizabeth Warren didn't become a woman overnight, and this question was directed towards why she's surging in the polls and overtaking Bernie Sanders. You're right, it is about name recognition. Why does Elizabeth Warren have more name recognition now than before? Well, because she is even using her wonky style to surge ahead in the polls by getting a lot of media love, and it's good. I'm glad she is running a decent campaign. I think it's a little boring for my taste personally, and I think that her policies don't go far enough in a lot of instances, or outright deny that there's a problem to begin with, like her proposal for a green military initiative, which I find to be offensive. But ultimately, the real reason why she's surging is because she's getting media coverage, and it's because she's out there talking about reasonable policies to all of the problems that Americans have. Here's what Bernie should be doing instead, getting his name out there as well. I think there's lessons to be learned from what Elizabeth Warren is doing at the moment.
Okay, so I have a very similar criticism. I told you I didn't love that answer earlier. So one is because of what Haas said. The fact that she's a woman didn't change. She was not polling well before, she's polling well now. What changed was all the nonstop policy proposals, which were fantastic. And so you should give her credit for that, and you should be honest about it. And Bernie has an excellent track record on that, and I think he should have gone in that direction. And as soon as he said it, I was actually in the next segment on Cuomo's show. I heard him say it in my ear, and I was like, that's gonna get misinterpreted. I can see the headlines now, and then boom, there they are, right?
Right.
And so what would have been a great answer, in my opinion, is, look, I think Elizabeth Warren is a fantastic progressive. I really like a lot of the policy proposals she put forward. Now, if you're Bernie Sanders and you think mine go a little further, no problem. Tell people yours go a little further and it's slightly more systemic change. But that doesn't mean you don't like her proposals. Her proposals are, you could say, even as a rival in this campaign, they're still fantastic. And I love that she's in this race and helping that get the progressive message out.
I can't believe you're being sexist again on camera. It's disgusting that you would say that Bernie Sanders has different proposals than Elizabeth Warren. That is sexist as heck.
Well, and by the way, look, they're gonna find anything to misinterpret, anything to go after him on. I do agree that he should stick to the policies, right? And I think it would have been better for him to give her credit for the policies that she's rolled out, but more importantly, show how he's different from her. Like, what is the difference? Because honestly, like, we're here, we're in the heart of these discussions, we know what's going on. Do the vast majority of Democratic voters know the differences between these two candidates? Now, Bernie Sanders in 2016 made progressive policies that previously were considered radical, mainstream. Now in the Democratic Party, these are mainstream policies and everyone else has picked them up for their own campaigns. Or at least a watered down version as you go down the list.
Except for Medicare for all, if I'm not mistaken, which Elizabeth Warren has a hard time coming to like a comprehensive, coming up with a comprehensive answer on. Maybe I'm mistaken though, maybe you guys can clarify.
No, I know what you're referring to, and it did seem like for a little while she was wavering on it based on the quotes. And I asked her about it when she was on the show, and you can interpret her answer for yourself. It's up on tyt.com. But she just signed the pledge. So tyt.com/pledge, and that clearly says I will fight for Medicare for all. Period.
Okay.
So I think that means something. And
look,
so
there are people,
and that's what she just did yesterday.
But there are people who are still confused at this point, and it's early on, and I understand. So I will clarify what my perspective is. Okay. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. The reason why I prefer Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren is because of what will happen once Bernie Sanders is elected or once Elizabeth Warren is elected. Elizabeth Warren is certainly way more progressive, infinitely more progressive than Barack Obama, for example, and certainly 100 times more progressive than Hillary Clinton. But there is one difference between her and Bernie Sanders, and that is Bernie Sanders understands what must be done. Bernie Sanders understands that public pressure is an absolute necessity. It is a our revolution situation with Bernie Sanders becoming the president. Versus with Elizabeth Warren, it's like, oh well, we'll try to work around and compromise and create legislation that will appeal to both sides. And I know that is a terrible strategy down the line. And that is what I'm afraid of with Elizabeth Warren candidacy.
Yeah, I hear you, and we all have slightly different points of view, and that's normal, right? And so I'm not sure I agree with that, but I understand that it's a concern and one that Elizabeth Warren should address. Just to come back all the way around to what should have been the answer. Look, there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I'm proud that I led on Medicare for all, and I've been leading on that my whole career. Bernie Sanders, and he can list about a dozen things that he led on, and he's absolutely right, and that other people followed on. And then he could turn around and give Elizabeth Warren credit and say she led on the banks. She led on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it's wonderful to have another progressive in the race. Trust me that would work 1,000 times better. And do not do a circular firing squad this early in the primaries.
Correct.
That's a really bad idea. Biden's still winning, and by a decent margin. So this is the mistake that the Republicans made when they were up against Trump. And they say, oh, don't hit Trump, hit each other.
Right.
Terrible idea, don't do that. Progressives, stick together, we'll win together. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.